Abaddon is not the galaxy's greatest failure. He is its longest-running execution. Every time a shrine world burns, and the ecclesiarchy calls it a heroic stand, his shadow is on the smoke. Every time the High Lords declare another Black Crusade repelled, his hand is already reaching for the next knife. That is the promise hidden in his name. This story is not about how the Imperium beat him, but about how he has been patiently sawing through its spine for 10,000 years. You have to start with the moment everyone thinks ended his story. The Siege of Terra, 014 Pent M31. The vengeful spirit drifted above the throne world like a wounded god-beast, armor blistered, voxnets screaming, decks slick with the blood of demigods. Somewhere at its heart, in a throne room turned abattoir, the Emperor and Horus had just torn each other apart. The legends always cut away from what happened next. They end with the Emperor carried to the Golden Throne, with the loyal legions howling in grief, with the traitors fleeing into the Eye of Terror in disarray. They do not linger on the other side of that door, where a man named Ezekiel Abaddon smashed his way through loyalist dead to reach what was left of his gene-sire. Picture it. Still stinks of burned ozone and psychic fire. Marble is glassed, banners charred, the War Master's grand mural cracked down the middle. Loyalist custodians lie in pieces. Palace walls are spattered with ichor that is not entirely human. Underestimated, and there, in the ruin of his own command throne, Horus lies broken. Armor in shards, flesh half vaporized, eyes burned empty. Around him, the sons who followed him into treason stand stunned, like children who have just realized their father can die. Most look away. One does not. Abaddon steps forward across the rubble. Cataphractii treads, grinding the eagle iconography of the Emperor into powder.
His gauntlets shake as he lifts Horus's corpse, not in tenderness, but in disbelief. This was the man he rebuilt the galaxy for. This was the hand that pointed them at Terra and promised them a better future. This is what the gods left behind when they decided the game was over. What happens to a warrior whose entire identity was first captain when there is no captain, no legion, no cause? They will come back to that corpse-strewn throne room and to the object Abaddon took from it that day. For now, follow him to the next scene. The retreat. Helen trader fleets broke from Terra in chaos. Word-bearers, world-eaters, emperor's children, death guard, 1,000 sons, each legion dragging its own shame and curses into the warp. The sons of Horus were among the worst off. They had led the rebellion. They had failed the loudest. The Eye of Terror welcomed them like a predator swallowing bleeding prey. On the demon world of Malium, storms boiled in colors that never existed on any sane spectrum. Continents shifted when no one was looking. Mountains bled when you touched them. In this hell, the survivors of the 16th Legion came to ground. They did not arrive as a united host, subjected as shards. War bands led by captains who had survived the siege. Justaran elite with their black and sea-green plates still crusted in loyalist blood. Reavers, rogue elements, damaged ships limping from the warp with holds full of half-mad Astartes. They brought their grief. They brought their rage. They brought their blame. The problem was simple. The Legion had lost its Primarch. The struggle was inevitable. Someone had to decide whether it died with him. On a plain of cracked obsidian that pulsed like a beating heart, two answers met. Falkis Kiber, the first captain of the Justarin in all but name, wanted to dig in and rule a fragment, become a petty warlord among many.
Others whispered of offering themselves wholly to one god or another, trading the shame of failure for the false certainty of devotion. Abaddon chose something else. He chose to be angry, not just at the Emperor, not just at the Loyalists, not just at the jealous Primarchs who had schemed against Horus. He chose to be angry at the gods. They had used his father like a tool. They had abandoned him when he lost. Now they expected the sons of Horus to fall to their knees and beg for scraps of favor. Abaddon spat that choice back in their faces. On Maelium's living plain, with warp lightning crawling across the sky and demons watching from the horizon, Abaddon called his brothers to witness. He painted his armor black, not for chaos, not for despair, but for mourning. He took the talon from Horus's corpse, that ancient gauntlet of archaeotech and warp claws, and did something none of the others dared. He admitted the heresy had failed. He admitted Horus had been wrong. Then he promised he would finish what Horus started, but on his own terms. Falcus didn't kneel, so Abaddon killed him. It was not a noble duel. It was brutal, ugly, and fast. Power fist against lightning claws. Cataphractii plate against cataphractii plate. Kibra was no weakling. For a time the ground shook with their impacts, and even the demons paused to watch. Barclays let Falcus think he had the upper hand, retreating, giving ground, letting his armor take glancing blows that would have pulped a tank. Then, when Kibra lunged for what he thought was a killing strike, Abaddon shifted just enough. Talon of Horus punched through Kibra's chest, talons erupting from his spine in a spray of oil and gore. When hit the living earth, Maelium shuddered. The struggle for the Legion had begun in earnest. Abaddon did not claim Horus's titles. He did not declare himself Primarch. He did not call himself War Master. Those words were poisoned. Instead, he reached for something older.
"Remember what we were before the High Lords of Terra wrote us into their legends?" he is said to have told the warbands on that plain. "We were the spear at the center of the Imperium. We were the first into every fire. We were the legion that made his empire possible. That is what they stole from us. That is what we take back." Later in this story, when the Black Legion marches under a dozen banners that once hated each other, you will see how powerful that promise really was. For now, watch him rebuild. The Eye of Terror is not a single world. It is an infection in reality. Planets fall into it and come out wrong. Stars are born out of sequence. Time loops and freezes and sprints. Ships that fled yesterday dock at ports that have not yet been built. The Low Abaddon turned that madness into a hunting ground. He went looking for his brothers. Not the Primarchs, Sans, the captains, the sergeants, the line officers, the ones responsible for making the legions actually work while demigods argued about philosophy. He found the sons of Horus wherever they limped, on demon moons where they killed each other over scraps of glory in gladiatorial pits made of fused bone, in broken battle barges orbiting storms where they had painted over their armor and their past, pretending to be something else, on worlds like Uralin and Haya, where cults had already begun carving their armor into shrines to coronate rage or Slaneshi excess. He challenged their leaders, and he gave their warriors a choice. Fight him and die, or kneel and become part of something that might hurt the Imperium more than any one legion could now manage alone. Not all accepted. The ones who refused
became examples. The who kneel became the first true core of what would be called in time the Black Legion. Renaming the Legion was more than a paint job.
The sea green of the sons of Horus had become a badge of shame. Every time they saw it in a reflection, they remembered the moment their father fell. They remembered the corpse on the vengeful spirit's throne. Abaddon ordered it burned away. In the demon forges of Maelium, in holds of captured ships, in warp-lit workshops lit by screaming braziers, Astartes stripped their plate down and repainted it black. Not the oily crimson of the World-Eater's blood, not the sickly jade of Nurgle's rot, not the gaudy excess of the Emperor's children. A void black edged in gold, the color of mourning, core of a hole where something used to be. They scraped away Horus's wolf skull badges. They tore down the Eye of Horus icons and stamped them into scrap. They kept the eye itself, of course, but now it meant more than one Primarch's personal symbol. It meant the Eye of Terror, the wound, the place they had been exiled to. They called themselves the Sons of Horus no longer. They became the Black Legion. And Abaddon took his first title. Not War Master, not King, not Demon Prince. Despoiler. Because if he could no longer build an empire for his father, he would dismantle the one his father had turned against. Unity among traitors is fragile. Even as he rebuilt, other forces in the Eye moved. Benson bearers preached surrender to chaos. World-Eaters carved empires of skulls on demon worlds. Thousand suns gorged on secrets. Night Lords vanished into the dark, hunting terror for its own sake. Death Guard turned plague planets into static fortresses. Abaddon did something no one expected. His ranks. The Black Legion did not remain purely 16 Legion. Sent emissaries to Night Lord's warbands, promising them more terror under his banner than they could manage alone. He lured Iron Warriors with the promise of fortresses to crack that put any Imperial citadel to shame. He offered word-bearers the chance to desecrate shrines that made their own backwater chapels look like children's scribbles. Charging sorcerers from the Thousand Suns, champions from the World-Eaters, renegades from chapters that had fallen long after the heresy, and welded them all into a single structure. This was the consequence of his unification, a legion that was no longer bound by gene seed or tradition, but by shared hatred. Remember that plane on Maelium? Remember how he chose to be angry at the gods themselves? That anger shaped what came next. Because the Black Legion is not a Chaos Legion in the way the others are. It is chaos weaponized against the Imperium, not the other way around. Unidentified time in the Eye does strange things to chronology. While the Imperium staggered through the Scouring, the Age of Rebirth, the Nova Terra Interregnum, Abaddon's rise from captain to despoiler unfolded in loops and eddies that defy neat dating. But for our purposes, think of 3 stages. First, consolidation. Bilingual. Then, experimentation. Finally, crusade. Consolidate where have seen. Unifying warbands, repainting armor, establishing the Black Legion as a banner to rally around instead of a mark of shame. Experimentation came next. Abaddon tested the Imperium like a knife edge. He sent raids, not crusades. He probed defenses at the Cadian Gate, not to break them yet, but to feel out how the defenders responded. He struck at isolated systems, not to hold them, but to see how long it took relief fleets to arrive, how quickly astropathic distress could cross the void.
One such raid became a legend in the dark archives of the Segmentum Obscurus. Castro, a small Black Legion spearhead, 3 strike cruisers, and a battle barge, translated into real space near a minor agri-world whose name no one remembers because the astropaths did not have time to send it. The Black Legion did not bombard. They cut Vox first.
They smashed the local orbital station, leaving debris burning in the atmosphere like a mockery of a meteor shower. Drop pods rained down on the capital hive, exploding open into Terminators whose armor was black as midnight oil. By the time the nearest Imperial Navy patrol arrived, they found the hive's primary administratum complex gutted, its data vaults stripped. Millions were dead, not in random slaughter, but in targeted purges. In a vault the Imperium never found, Abaddon's scribes catalogued what they had taken: transit schedules, regiment movement orders, the tithe rates for 6 sectors, lists of which worlds were deemed expendable and which would always receive relief first. He was building a map. Later in this story, when we stand on the deck of the Planet Killer looking down at a fortress world whose name you know very well, remember that it began with raids like this. She recorded incident as Chaos Piracy. The High Lords filed it as an isolated atrocity. Abaddon filed it as research. The first Black Crusade, when it came, did not look like the apocalypse the ecclesiarchy would later paint it as in stained glass. It was the tip of a spear. Abaddon hurled his legion at the Cadian Gate not to annihilate it, but to see how far he could push before snapping his blade. The battles were savage. Black Legion warbands crash-landed on Cadian bastions, fought through kilometers of trenchworks under skies turned inside out by warp storms, and died in their tens of thousands. Abaddon himself led boarding actions in the Black Between. The Talon of Horus drank Commissar blood. Dracnean, still young as a bound entity then, tasted the souls of voidsmen and ship serfs who had never even heard the word heresy spoken aloud. The crusade ended with the Imperium claiming victory. Cadia stood. The gate held. Despoiler retreated into the eye. But look at what he carried away. Captured officers, broken on interrogator altars, whose minds yielded the details of pylon geometry they were never supposed to know. Pilfered fragments of Necron origin structures from the edges of the gate. Records of how Astra Militarum regiments from 12 worlds held together, or didn't, under pressure. Every Black Crusade would follow this pattern: problem, struggle, consequence. The problem was always the same. How do you kill a god emperor entombed at the center of a galaxy-spanning war machine? The struggle changed: fleets, cults, demons, Xenos pawns. The consequence was never straightforward victory, but acquisition, artifacts, cracks in reality, psychological scars in the enemy. In the quiet between crusades, Abaddon returned to the Eye to digest. Life aboard the vengeful spirit in those centuries was a form of ritualized madness. Imagine a warship the size of a small continent, prowling a sea where physics is a suggestion. Its corridors shift, its shrines grow additional mouths, its gun decks whisper. But at its heart, the command sanctum remains fixed, anchored by Abaddon's will and by relics that predate any Imperial archive. There, beneath banners taken from worlds that no longer exist, the Despoiler sits on a throne carved from the bones of his past life. Remains of Horus,
fragments of the original War Master's command dais. Ceramite plates torn from the walls of the Imperial Palace. Each trophy is a reminder and a warning. Around him, lieutenants gather. Iskandar Khayan, whose sorcery binds demons into useful shapes instead of letting them drag the Legion into mindless pacts. Yegethmor, twisted by Nurgle but still sharp enough to plan contamination campaigns. Devram Korda, a prophet of hate whose sermons can turn trembling cultists into mobs that will hurl themselves into plasma fire without flinching. These councils are not meetings of equals. Abaddon listens. He asks questions.
He says no more often than he says yes, especially when the gods' gifts come with too obvious a price. When Khorne demands endless frontal assaults, Abaddon finds a flank. When Tzeentch offers a pact that smells like a trap, Abaddon takes the knowledge and refuses the leash. The gods hate him for it. They love him for it. He is their paradox, the champion who refuses to be owned. That paradox is why he lasts. Most traitor champions burn themselves out. They chase ascension and become demon princes, losing whatever human perspective they had. Or they sell themselves entirely to one god and are thrown away as soon as their usefulness dips. Abaddon walks a tighter line. He takes war gear the size of myths, Draknian, the Talon, and lets them whisper, but not dictate. He dons armor crusted with unholy sigils and makes it move at his command, not the other way around. He does not seek immortality through demonhood. He seeks it through impact. Now we turn to a war the Imperium remembers as a victory, and Abaddon remembers as a successful test of a weapon the galaxy should never have let him touch: the Gothic War. The Imperium calls it a sector-wide conflict in 139 to 160 M41. Administratum scribes file it under Major Zeno's Chaos Incursion. Navy officers remember it as the darkest years of their careers. Abaddon thinks of it as the Crusade where he learned how to kill stars. Blackstone fortresses. Ancient, angular entities older than the Imperium, older than the Eldar, older maybe even than the first human crawling out of old Earth's oceans. The Imperium used them as fortresses because that is all it understood. Massive gun platforms, bastions, symbols of dominance. Abaddon saw something different. With knowledge stolen in earlier crusades and whispers pried from the minds of broken Eldar seers, he realized what Blackstone really was: reality's scalpel. A tool designed not just to project force, but to cut the warp out of an area like a surgeon excising a tumor, or to invert that function and turn them into warp lenses that could fry a system from the inside out. So he came for them. The Gothic sector burned, electronic-rich storms, raiding fleets using trajectories the Navy had never seen before because no human tactician had been insane enough to plot paths that skimmed so close to warp rifts. Chaos cults in every port, primed years in advance, sabotaging defense lasers and void shields at the exact moment the Black Legion appeared on Auspex. In void battles that lasted days, battle fleets clashed with chaos armadas under skies split by warp lightning. At Gethsemane, whole flotillas vanished in sudden holes in reality as black stone beams carved reality into pieces. Abaddon did not need to hold the sector. He needed to learn the pattern. He captured one fortress, Wind, abrasive. Imperial counterattacks were furious. Inquisition task forces hurled everything they had at the Despoiler's flagship. Space Marine chapters teleported entire first companies into boarding actions that turned Black Legion corridors into charnel houses. But by the time the Gothic War ended, Abaddon had walked away with proof of concept. Blackstone could break worlds in a way that even Exterminatus could not. It could break the things under worlds. Pylons, anchor points, those mysterious Necron constructs the Imperium barely understood, clustered around places like the Cadian Gate. Remember that first raid on the Agra world, where Black Legionnaires tore tithe schedules from administratum vaults and quietly disappeared? The Gothic War was that raid scaled up to a sector. Whenever the Imperium declared victory, because the majority of its worlds still orbited their suns afterward, Abaddon declared success because he had tested star killers, learned how they interacted with the Imperium, and taken what he needed. In between crusades,
While sectors licked their wounds and cardinal astral preachers delivered sermons about how faith had once again triumphed, the Black Legion's forges ran hot. Go down into those demon-lit factories for a moment. See the rows of chained thralls, mutant, human, things that used to be Astartes, hammering corrupted adamantium into plates that will one day bear the eye and the eight-pointed star. Hear the shrieks of bound demons beaten into engine casings. Watch tech marines turned warpsmiths drag cables as thick as hab blocks across floors slick with burning oil. Laminate cane-random chaos, consciousness, this is industrialized heresy. Abaddon is not interested in one more blood-soaked shrine world. He wants fleets. He wants an army of armies. He wants a legion that can throw itself against the fortress gates of reality again and again until either they break or the Imperium does. Remember the first scene. The corpse on the throne of the vengeful spirit. The Primarch who failed. Abaddon never forgot that image. Every crusade is his attempt to ensure that when his moment comes, he will not make the same mistake. By the time Part 1 of this chronicle draws to a close, the galaxy stands at the edge of the 13th Black Crusade. Orbitalium is tired. Spinal after sector has been bled white by Tyranids, by Necrons, by Orcs, by its own internal paranoia. Chapters are under strength. Guard regiments are patched together from the remnants of those that died screaming on worlds no one remembers. The administratum is buried in its own lies. In the eye, the vengeful spirit hangs in a sea of roiling fire, and Abaddon the Despoiler looks out from his command throne at the projection of a single star, Cadia's sun. Around it, Blackstone icons orbit, data runes flickering. Pylon schematics float in the air. Warp tide predictions swirl like incense smoke. 1,000 tiny details that, taken alone, mean nothing. Taken together, They mean this. Every Black Crusade up to now has been rehearsal. The problem has not changed. The spout to intensify. And the consequence, when it lands, will carve a wound through the heart of the Imperium that even Terra will feel. We will come back to this war. We will watch the pylons crack, the sky split, the rift open, the map of the galaxy itself change. But that is for another part of this tale. For now, hold one last image in your mind. A man once called First Captain stands in the half-light of a ship that has been his exile and his home for 10,000 years. In one hand, a claw that killed a Primarch. In the other, a demon sword that hates everything that lives. Around him, an army that has given up on redemption, but not on purpose. The Imperium calls him failure. The gods call him champion. Abaddon calls himself something simpler.
all the son who failed to save his father. The weapon that will finish the job. Not dream of peace. He dreams of the moment when Terra looks the way the vengeful spirit's throne room looked after the Emperor was done with Horus. Walls cracked, banners burning, and something once thought untouchable broken open on the floor. From the command throne of his ship, Abaddon watches the script for that moment slowly resolve. The hololithic starscape before him is not the neat, sanctioned astrocartography of the Administratum. It is warped, stretched, regions of reality highlighted not by mass or luminosity, but by stress. Red veining, warp tides. Black scars, previous crusades. Cold white nodes, pylons, black stone artifacts, places where reality and unreality grind against each other like tectonic plates. One system glows brighter than the rest. Cadia. The Imperium calls it a fortress world, a bulwark, a gate that turns the eye of terror from a rotting wound into a siege line. Blind's Abaddon looks at it and sees something else. He sees a keystone.
Pledge. The problem, as always, is the same. How do you murder a god emperor whose corpse world is propped up by an entire species' fear? The struggle, this time, will focus on the stone in the arch. Consequence will not stop at that one world if he gets this right. Psychologically, he has been setting the pieces. Remember the raids for data tithes, the stolen transit schedules, the quiet murders of Administratum functionaries whose absence would not be noticed. Remember the Gothic War and the way he learned to steer black stone fortresses like scalpels through the warp. Remember the early Black Crusades, those failures that left behind altered star charts, seeded cults, crippled shipyards. All of that effort bends toward a single line of attack. He calls it, aloud, for the first time in a war council aboard the Vengeful Spirit, his lieutenants and allied lords gathered under the glow of hololithic fire. The 13th. There is a ripple of unease. For mortals, 13 is a number used in nursery superstitions. For beings who have walked the warp's tides for 10,000 years, it is heavier. It feels like an ending. A backgammon makes sure it sounds like a beginning. He does not promise victory. He promises something worse. We are not going to crack the gate and bleed out against its walls again, he tells them, armored fingers drumming on the arm of his throne. We are going to break what the gate is built on. He turns the projection so they can all see. Fall back Cadia's orbit, its moon. The ring of ancient pylons embedded in its crust like fangs in a throat. Black stone constructs, Necron relics repurposed by ignorance into warding structures, their true purpose only dimly understood even by the tech priests who maintain them. First, we take their shields, he says. Then, we take their air. Finally, we take away the shape of their sky. The 13th Black Crusade ignites not as a single straightforward charge, but as a storm front. Out in the halo of the Cadian system, reality begins to tear. The first Imperial auger stations report anomalous readings. Then they go silent. Rogue traders vanish from their established routes. Listening posts on dead moons detect Vox traffic that should not be possible. Echoes of long-dead Legion war cant interspersed with the laughter of things that do not have throats. The Time Segmentum Command admits that a crusade is underway. The Black Legion is already there.
The opening blow is not a bombardment, it is deception. Abaddon throws lesser warband as a screen. World Eaters, renegade chapters, piratical splinter fleets, all smashing against Cadian pickets in a tide of blood and fire. Navy admirals, conditioned by previous crusades, respond as expected. They pivot to meet these main thrusts, reinforcing known approaches, tightening their cordon around the gate. While they do, the real knife moves elsewhere. Undisclosed under the cover of that chaos, the Black Legion's core elements slip through gaps, cults on the surface uprising in precisely synchronized riots. Sabotage cells detonate munitions in orbital stations, killing crews and opening corridors for teleport strikes. Then the Blackstone arrives. One fortress only. Waddict's one is enough. It manifests on auspex like a hole in the stars. Sensors spike and die around it. Its engines do not burn in any spectrum humans were meant to see. It simply appears on the edge of the system like something the galaxy had forgotten it swallowed once. Imperial astropaths scream. Abaddon watches from the vengeful spirit's bridge as the fortress rotates, its massive prongs aligning with geometric coldness toward Cadia and the lattice of pylons threaded through its crust. All the experimentation in the Gothic sector pays off. Cadia's pylons are a lock. The first lance of inverted energy slams through the void.
Also, vaporize anything on contact. It does something worse. It makes the warp and the material universe hate each other even more than usual in that narrow band of space. Storms howl. The eye's roiling wall presses harder against the thin membrane of normal reality. Pylons begin to vibrate, their Necron geometries struggling to compensate, to bleed off the stress. Techno-priests in red robes rush into control sanctums, chanting Benheric prayers to machines they do not understand. Abaddon knows exactly how much pressure to apply. He here has spent centuries finding that threshold. On Cadia's surface, guardsmen feel it as a low-grade headache. Psychers feel it as a knife shoved behind the eyes. Geller fields around ships in high orbit begin to fizz and falter. Pets howl. Children cry for no reason their parents can understand. Then the main guns open. Black Legion capital ships, planet killer derivatives, demon engines bound into void dreadnought frames, they all vomit fire. Shields bloom over Cadian bastions and hold at first. That is what they were built to do. Rock and hab blocks shiver but do not break. Abaddon is not trying to win by direct force. He is trying to make Cadia too busy to notice what the Blackstone is doing to the pylons. While the skies burn, drop pods fall. The ground war begins. It is not a story of clean lines and obvious fronts. It is fractured, a dozen simultaneous nightmares. In the Ashercraft, Black Legion Terminators fight through habstacks turned impromptu citadels, room by room, under stairwells turned into execution zones by Cadian fire discipline. In the shadow of Kasser Vark, a single Titan maniple of the Legio Astorum holds a valley alone, its plasma annihilators painting the horizon with sun-bright lances as traitor knights charge, each duel a myth of gods killing gods, while infantry die in the mud at their feet. In the bowels of an underground bunker,
An inquisitor burns entire regiments with a single word, sealing blast doors and venting air to space, rather than let a demonic incursion spread. On all this carnage, the Blackstone Fortress keeps firing. Each pulse subtly alters the relationship between Cadia's pylons and the storm wall of the eye, At first, the change is incremental, tiny. The adepts trying to monitor it through failing auspex barely notice the trend. But like a pressure gauge ticking upward in a sealed boiler, it matters. Later in this story, when the planet breaks, remember these tiny increments. Remember that the end of worlds can begin as small, almost statistical changes no one has time to consider because everything is already on fire. Abaddon does not stay in orbit. He leads from the front when the symbolism will matter. Predetermined Black Legion spearheads punch their way into Khazar Ekrad, the fortress complex that anchors many of Cadia's remaining defenses. It is Abaddon at their head. The Talon of Horus tears open bastion doors. Draknian leaves after-images in the air, a smear of nothing that unravels flesh and metal alike. Across the blasted courtyards, another figure moves to meet him. Lord Castellan Ursakar E. Creed is not a demigod. He is a mortal man who has spent his life commanding others to die in ways that would matter. He knows, as he watches Abaddon stride through the smoke, that he cannot win this duel in the sense that holodramas mean it. But he also knows something else. Symbols cut both ways. If the Despoiler walks through Cadia's last Lord Castellan without a mark, the Cadians will break. Someone Creed fights, not with his own hands, though he is no stranger to a bolt pistol, but with everything he has left. Hidden artillery batteries fire on coordinates he ordered weeks earlier as contingency. Pre-sighted kill zones thick with overlapping fields of fire erupt around the Black Legion advance. Manticores down to their last rockets volley.
Demolisher cannons trade barrels for one more shot. For a time, it works. Macro shells and las fire, Abaddon seems to disappear, his advance halted. Documentsmen cheer, hoarse, exhausted. Then the smoke parts. He is still there. Armor scorched, cloak tattered, but alive and moving and angry. The duel between symbol and symbol ends the way most such duels do when one symbol is backed by a demon sword and the favor of chaos itself. Creed is not slain in single combat. He is buried under the inevitable. But he buys time, and time on Cadia is measured by how long the pylons can keep the sky from tearing open. High above, the Blackstone Fortress channels its power one last time. The shot is not aimed at the surface, it is aimed at the planet's moon. The weapon's beam cuts through the void and punches into the rock with a precision that makes the tech priests watching from their sinking cogitators weep in binary. The moon shudders. Flirts lace its surface. The moon falls. The impact does not obliterate Cadia outright. Its mass and the world's mass wrestle, trade momentum, translate kinetic violence into planetary fractures. The pylons, rooted deep in the crust, snap like brittle bones. In that instant, the balance they have been forcing on the space around the eye fails. Blinks. The warp screams in. On the ground, guardsmen feel the world jerk under their boots. Trenches buckle. Fortress walls split along fault lines they were never designed to tank. Oceans surge. Anyone with the faintest psychic sensitivity drops, clawing at their own skulls. The storm wall of the Eye of Terror surges forward like a tidal wave finally allowed to break. This is the consequence Abaddon has been aiming at since the first Data Vault raid, the first Blackstone test fire, the first Crusade repulsed to a chorus of Imperial hymns. Cadia does not explode in a neat ball of fire.
It dies in slow motion. Continents tilt, hive spires peel away and fall sideways. Fortress cities slide into newly broken seas. Regiments fight on collapsing plateaus, firing on foes who are already sliding into the abyss. Valkyries try to evacuate what they can and are snatched from the air by gravitational anomalies. Somewhere in that carnage, Creed is dragged away against his will, a stolen chess piece carried off the board by players the Imperium will not even know existed for decades. In orbit, the vengeful spirit watches the planet crack. Abaddon stands at the forward viewport, watching. Around him, the bridge crew, mortals, possessed servitors, chaos Astartes at their stations, hold their breath. This is the moment every sermon on Terra will later try to paint as a temporary setback. Every propaganda pict will reduce to a silent, still frame. But here, now, it is the murder of a world that defined an age. Gone. The wound is open. And across the entire galaxy, the lights go out. The Great Rift is not a thing you can walk up to and touch. It is not a single line on a map that someone can point to and say, here is the end of certainty. It is the consequence of every stress Abaddon and 1,000 other calamities have been inflicting on reality since the first gene seed was cut from the Emperor's sons. Cadia's failure is the pivot point. Zaladictum tears the galaxy from pole to pole, a rent of screaming warp where stable roots once were. Half the Imperium falls into a twilight of failing astropathic links and orphaned worlds. The other half staggers under the sudden surge of demonic incursions, its vaunted fleets and armies stretched across fires they can never fully extinguish. From the bridge of the vengeful spirit, Abaddon sees none of that directly. He sees the beginnings. Distress calls overlap and cut out. Whole subsectors worth of beacons going dark. He sees in rough outline the thing he has been forcing toward for millennia. An Imperium divided not by ideology, but by physics. Now we zoom out. Leave Abaddon for a moment, his fleet prowling the storm's edge, flooring at the Imperium as it appears across the next decades. In one half, the newborn entity they eventually call Imperium Nihilus, the Imperium of Dark, lurches in isolation. Worlds that once counted on reinforcement now receive only silence. Shrine worlds watch their patron chapters' muster halls stand empty. Forge worlds hoard munitions, refusing to answer distress calls because they know there may never be replacement shipments. In the other half, under the dim balm of Guilliman's return and the Indomitus Crusade, the gears grind harder. Primaris reinforcements pour from arc ships, plugging holes as fast as they open. But even here, every new victory feels narrower. Every secured sector is one brush away from becoming a second front. On every front, the same pattern repeats. Multiply faster than solutions. Struggles become constant, not cyclical. Consequences that would once have been localized now cascade across whole sectors. You want to understand what that feels like on the ground? You do not start with Cadia. You go to Armageddon. Armageddon is not Abaddon's war. It is Gazgul's. It is the Emperor's other lesson in what happens when hate refuses to die. But in the age after the Great Rift, wars stop belonging neatly to single enemies. Every theater is affected by every other. The cloud of orc spores over Armageddon, the green tide crashing against hive walls, is not separate from the warp storms Abaddon has intensified. It is another symptom. Armageddon has always been a cursed rock. First, Angron and his world eaters came,
turning its skies into a crucible of blood.
Then, years later, Gazgul Mag Uruk Thraka arrived with the Second War, and the world discovered there are things even a demon Primarch's scars cannot teach you to endure. Later still, the Third War turns everything up another notch, turning the place into a permanent meat grinder. Hell's Reach. We saw earlier how Cadia died over days. Hell's Reach lives, and that is worse. Hive spires that reach into polluted clouds, basilica rooftops turned into gun pits, bridges turned into last stands, cracks between blocks turned into killing alleys. Now imagine that, instead of Abaddon's Terminators, an endless green tide hammers those causeways. Orcs, not subtle, not patient, not strategic in any way an Imperial staff officer would recognize. In Carcera, Greenhouse simply seeds the ground for more. Every fallen orc rots into spores. Every spore births a new fighter in time. Every victory for the defenders is a down payment on a larger wave later. Atkins uses campaigns like this as weather vanes. From the eye, from the storm clouds of his own theater, he watches worlds like Armageddon, not because he is personally invested in them, but because they tell him what the Imperium is spending. Sees the Space Marines diverted. Black Templars, Salamanders, Marines malevolent, all burning chapters of their own history in that furnace. He sees Astra Militarum regiments chewed up, Steel Legion, Celestial Lions, millions of nameless conscripts whose only monument is the fact that Hell's Reach did not fall on a particular day. Commissars like Yarick rise from those fires, turned into legends by surviving, and he files it away. Between the Great Rift is not just a wound, it is an amplifier. Under its shadow, every orc wah is worse. Every demonic incursion is fiercer. Every tyrannid tendril probes deeper. The universe's background noise of violence gets louder. Register Dr. Getcher. He did not start the wars for Armageddon, but sawing through Cadia's spine and splitting the galaxy, he ensured that worlds like Armageddon would find their next wars harder to survive. Now, return from Hell's Reach's burning bridges to the warlord in the eye who has turned local crises into a systemic condition. The Despoiler does not need to place a single Black Legionnaire on Armageddon soil to benefit from it. Every one guardsman who dies there is one who cannot be rushed to the Cadian gate. Every Titan engine turned to face Gazgul is a gun not available when the Black Legion comes calling elsewhere. Every saint's miracle is a flicker of the Emperor's failing psychic power spent on one front instead of another. The part of Abaddon's genius the ecclesiarchy will never write hymns about. He understands that in the 41st millennium, war is not a series of disconnected tragedies. It is a single pressure system. Pullets here, and the defenses buckle there. Whipping a fire in one hive, and a fortress world 3 subsectors away has to send regiments. Brachia, and suddenly the orcs on Armageddon have a slightly easier time, because the convoys that might have reinforced its defenders are now lost in warp storms, if they launch at all. Later in this story, when you think about Abaddon's record, remember Hell's Reach. Remember the green-skinned tides. Remember Yarick glaring into the smoke,
and Gazgul laughing under artillery storms. Then remember who made sure the galaxy in which they fight is one where no one has enough left to put that fire out forever. Gaben's war is not just fought with bolters and demon blades. It is fought with exhaustion. Think of the Imperium as a man bleeding from 100 cuts. A limb. Brightness, Tegranids take an organ. Necrons carve out a chunk of spine. Abaddon's crusades are the hand on the knife, twisting.
Bishop's the era Indomitus grinds on. His campaigns shift again. Cadia is gone. Rift is open. The black stone fortress he used there is shattered, but he no longer needs it in the same way. The damage is done. Now he turns to exploitation. Crusade theaters ignite. Sebastulus, a strategically vital world at the intersection of tendril roots and warplanes, Abaddon opens a wound that looks almost mundane compared to Cadia's annihilation. Industry, logistics, a choke point. He throws the Black Legion at it not because he wants the world itself, but because he knows how much its loss, or even its prolonged siege, will cost. Answers, of course. Abdullah Primaris Marines, newly minted, crash into Black Legion lines with doctrinal fervor. Gilliman himself is forced to divert attention to shoring up this one embattled world. Orcs are there too, because where there is a concentration of guns and targets, orcs simply appear. Abaddon uses them. Abaddon uses their master, he does not try to be. Orcs are a fire you point at something else and then get out of the way of. But he knows how to fight beside them without getting burned if the timing is right. He pushes where they push. When the greenskins heap pressure on one flank, he drives Chaos Marine spearheads through the gaps that open elsewhere. When Imperial commanders focus on stopping a Stompa from trampling a hive, he uses that distraction to land another war band near the critical Prometheum reserves. From the vantage point of a guardsman on the ground, it all looks like one tidal wave of horror. Greenskins yelling, Chaos Marines chanting praises to dark gods, demons climbing out of corpses. From Abaddon's vantage point, it is a spreadsheet of enemy responses and resource allocation. He is watching to see how quickly the Imperium learns. The answer, again and again, is too slowly. Back on the vengeful spirit, in the quiet between assaults,
What passes for quiet in the eye, Abaddon walks the trophy halls.
especially not just decoration. They a ledger of consequences. Here, a scrap of Cadia's bastion stone, engraved with diminishing coordinates of where the fortress once stood before the planet cracked. There, a banner torn from an Armageddon regiment that died on some other world because it was rerouted mid-transit to deal with a new crisis. Elsewhere, a chunk of blackstone, inert now, its edges still humming faintly with the memory of the energy it once channeled. He runs his gauntlet over each as he passes, not in sentiment, in assessment. This is what it has cost. This is what remains to be done. He knows time is not infinite, even for him. The gods are patient in their own way, but their patience is noisy. They clamor. They want another Primarch dragged down, another shrine defiled, another field of skulls. He gives them enough victories to keep them from turning him into just another screaming demon thing. He gives them worlds. He gives them saints' corpses. He gives them broken chapters and ruined shrine worlds. But always, under it, he keeps his own tally. On that list, Terra is still at the top. Thresh 13th Black Crusade shattered the galaxy. It did not end the war. The Great Rift has made reaching the throne world more complicated, but also more necessary. Every year that passes, the Emperor rots a little further on his machine. Every year, the Imperium leans a little more on myth and a little less on infrastructure. There will be windows. Abaddon intends to be ready when one opens. He returns about that final push, began with, Horus's corpse on the vengeful spirit's throne. He replays it not as a trauma, but as a case study. The Primarch overreached. He took the field himself, yes, but he let the gods cram too much power into his flesh.
He believed their assurance that he was invincible. He allowed his will to be wrapped in their expectations. Abaddon refuses that path. He will stand on Terra if he reaches it, as he stands everywhere else, enhanced by chaos, armored in relics, wielding weapons infused with things that should never have names, but still fundamentally what he has always been. An Astartes, a soldier, a man who made a choice and has not let 10,000 years of other voices take it away from him. That, perhaps more than his strategic patience, is what makes him truly terrifying. There are demon primarchs who have burned hotter, faster. There are warlords who have taken more worlds in single blitzkriegs. There are orc prophets whose Wa fields have bent physics in stranger ways than any ritual Abaddon sorcerers have managed. But how many enemies has the Imperium faced who can hold on to an idea for 10 millennia without letting it rot? In the end, that might be the sharpest edge of the knife at the Imperium's throat. Donaldan, not Dracnian, not the fleets, the fortresses, the cults. The fact that somewhere in the eye of terror, a single will still refuses to accept that Terra cannot fall. And while he grinds toward that, Armageddon keeps burning. Gazgul will come and go. Yarick will rise and fade. The hives will be rebuilt and wrecked in cycles that begin to feel like a ritual sacrifice enacted on a planetary scale. Orc spores will never truly be purged from its soil. Even if the Imperium wins a given campaign there, the victory is temporary. Armageddon is what the galaxy looks like when an enemy refuses to let you rest. Abaddon Crusades makes sure that state is not confined to one world. He wants the Imperium to feel like Armageddon everywhere. Unwilling wants every hive to fear its own hell's reach, every governor to see a little of Cadia's fate in their sky.
Every regimental commander to understand that even if they win today, the enemy who attacks tomorrow will be stronger, hungrier, and less impressed by their stories. That the larger conclusion buried in the wreckage of the Cadian Gate and echoed in the ash of Armageddon's wastelands. It is not that Abaddon is the man who always fails, is that his failures have changed what failure looks like for everyone else. In a sane universe, the fall of a fortress world or the scarring of a shrine planet would be a historical anomaly, a horror studied in academies, not repeated in endless variations. In the 41st millennium, thanks in no small part to the Despoiler, disasters like Cadia and hellscapes like Armageddon are the baseline. Galaxy no longer asks, will there be another war? It asks, where will we bleed next, and with how much? Abaddon has already won more than any High Lord is willing to admit by making that the only question they have time to ask. Somewhere, beyond the map lines of any sanctioned chart, the vengeful spirit prowls the tides of the eye.
Its hull is scarred with the history of a civil war that never really ended. Its holds are crammed with weapons that should not exist. Its captain wears armor as black as the void, and carries a claw that once tore a Primarch apart. He is not done. Out in the dark, other threats sharpen their teeth. Necron dynasties recalibrate their tombs, awakening for wars of their own. Tyranid tendrils probe the galactic rim, drawn by the psychic beacon of 1,000,000 dying worlds. Orc warlords like Gazgul listen to the hum of the Great Rift and hear it as a drumbeat calling them to new Waz. Armageddon, Cadia, Vigilus, these are not endpoints. They are rehearsal stages. And if you want to understand the shape of the final performance, you will have to follow the Despoiler's shadow as it stretches, slowly, inevitably, toward the throne world itself.
Because somewhere in the eye, Abaddon the Despoiler is still looking at that hololithic map, still tracing routes through the storm, still turning the same problem over in his mind with the patience of a torturer. How do you kill a god that an entire species has nailed to a chair at the center of a burning universe? When he figures out the last piece of that answer, the wars for Cadia and Armageddon will look small. And in the grim darkness beyond that horizon, there are other throne rooms, other war masters, other warlords who think they understand what ruin means. Their stories will be told in turn, if there is anyone left to tell them.